This is the Grassy Knoll on Remnant Radio, coming to you from Boulder City, Nevada, courtesy of Paul Pilgrim. And Paul, can I assume that we got Dr. Ellen Lacter on the other end?
Ellen is waiting.
Yes.
All right. I want to introduce Dr. Ellen Lacter. She's been on before. Did a great job dealing with victims of ritual abuse. We're going to expand that a little bit more, and also offer a question by a listener that was kind of in the same ballpark that Ellen and I talked about off mic. And so, Dr. Lacter, thank you very much for coming back to the Knoll.
Of course.
Okay. Of course, not necessarily. You can always...
All right. Happy to.
All right. Again, this is not in the germane to what we had said in the outline that we discussed and agreed on. Mm-hmm. But the listener, it's just one of those people that when he says something, I like to address it. Mm-hmm. We talked off mic, as I remember, about this whole bit about implants and RFID and whether or not they could somewhat affect behavior. And specifically at the time I was thinking about this, it was about battlefield behavior. Could you make a soldier more aggressive? Could you make him less susceptible to fatigue? And you said that there was something that you thought mechanically with a chip that really couldn't do that. Could you explain that to us in a sense, in layman's terms?
Well, a lot of people are concerned that a chip of some kind that's implanted in the brain could send thoughts to them or read their thoughts. And a chip way of working, and the brain has a completely different chemical and morphological way of working. The two forms of communication for the brain, it's all these different chemicals and neurons and dendrites and axons and...
Okay. Are you still with us? Am I losing her, or?
Do you hear me?
You were fading out a little bit.
I have like an echo on mine.
All right. No, well, go ahead with your thought, and I want to ask specifically what this
about
person...
the aggressive behavior.
Well, or this whole bit about can a chip do something that could, affect one's behavior, or...
Well, okay. I don't believe you can transmit thoughts into a brain through a chip. You could have some kind of radio receiver where it would actually be coming in through the auditory system, just like as if the person were whispering something to you in your ear. But you can't communicate into a chip and have the brain anatomy be able to read that. Now, could you stick a chip somewhere in the temporal lobe or in the amygdala or some part of the brain that relates to feelings of aggression and potentially send an electrical stimulus to, stimulate that part of the brain to feel more aggressive at the moment but not really have control about how that's going to be expressed, possibly. Mm-hmm. But I have a feeling that could be pretty uncontrolled. It would be kind of like a temporal lobe seizure where people that have that condition just fly into a rage and they don't know what they're smashing or who they're hitting. It wouldn't be very effective.
All right, well, here's what the question was specifically, and I said to the person, I wrote to the person via email that you spoke to this before, if I've got it right, because I'm a dumbhead when it comes to science. But here's the email the person wrote, positing a possible scenario, which made me want to at least run that by you, Doc. And it said, let me see, where can I pick it up? All right, let's say Tamiflu can contribute to the virus having more lethal mutations, and the evildoers will then release a new virus that will attack neuromuscular control, paralysis, and the loss of cognitive function. After millions die or become paralyzed because of this new mutation, the games really begin. All right, now he's positing a scenario. Now, last graph.
The warfare here so far.
What's that?
biological warfare. What is it?
Agreeable, yes. And
Okay.
here's his second and last paragraph. It will be released to the world that the BMES, Engineering Research Center, has found a cure, and it will be a chip that uses intelligent analog circuits, interface technology at the nano and micro scales to integrate microelectronic systems with neurons. We now have a biometric/biomedical system that will protect us. Now, he was throwing it out there, and in fact, the name of the email he called Wild Theory, and I'm saying not necessarily so, but let's run this by you. So, with what I've read, could you address the plausibility of such a thing?
Okay, I'm not totally clear. I understand everything that person is saying, but I do believe you can stimulate a general area to, for instance, the parts of the brain that perceive or that process tactile stimuli. You could probably find, I'm pretty sure this could be done, find the place in the brain, because this is already fairly mapped out, where, let's say, the foot is. And you could put some type of a little chip in there that would electrically stimulate that part of the brain so that the person would perceive sensation in their foot. But you can't. So in other words, you can increase sensation. Maybe there's something you can do to decrease sensation. You could probably do the same with cause the hand to jerk, cause the hand to stop. But a thought, a complex thought, even walk 3 feet to the right, I do not believe the brain could interpret anything from a chip. Because the brain has these axons and dendrites that go all over the place. Each neuron has all these dendrites that connect to all these other neurons, and they spread out. So some might be right next to it, some might be far away. How could a chip would have to be everywhere the cells are? I just don't think it even makes any logical sense. Are you there? Hello? Hello?
Oh, I'm sorry. I should turn things on. No, I wanted to run that by you. Thank you for awakening me from my sleep. I wanted to run that by you because, unfortunately, this idea, and maybe somewhere down the line, God knows we'll be around for it. It could be a possibility. But, so many are freaking out now about this. And, I just think that there has to be some kind of voice of at least causality and practicality that can say, probably not now. Now, the listener who sent that, Doc, was just, positing it and said, well, this is a wild theory. And I'm saying, I'm not so sure. But again, as you said to me months ago, that whole idea of the chip's ability to do certain things is probably still the province of science fiction or paranoia, but really not practical for all intents and purposes right now, right?
I think, yes, science fiction, paranoia, where people who have fear from some other source, they can't figure out why I'm so afraid, because maybe it's associated, maybe they were programmed not to remember. They know that they feel afraid all the time, so they're going, why am I afraid? Why am I afraid? They're looking all around them, and they're going, maybe I'm being targeted. Maybe there's, all these global things. Maybe everybody is doing something to me. Maybe somebody's sending electromagnetic waves to me. They're trying to their mind is trying to make sense of the fear that they experience. So and if they feel intense fear, then they become afraid that somebody's actually in their mind or communicating to their mind or watching their every thought and actions from inside of their mind. So it's kind of a understandable thing for them to hang the fear on, but that might be complicated by deliberate disinformation, lots and lots of information about all these tips that can read your mind and can send thoughts to you. Maybe that's done by some of the people who want they're victims of torture-based mind control to think that that's what's going on and to think that they can be watched to that degree. And sometimes they actually deliberately program people in these mind control projects, or cults program their people to believe that they have chips in their mind. Lots of people are programmed to believe there are chips in their mind.
Well,
Read their thoughts or can send thoughts to them.
Well, there's a lot of that going around, and I don't know if you think this is unfair. That's fine. We don't have to address it. I have had people on who are adamant that they have been harassed electronically or psychotronically, and I kind of believe them. As far as what your experience with ritual abuse victims, are you seeing that? Can you resonate with the fact that in fact is taking place?
Okay, I think it's very possible to be zapped from relatively short range by, in the same way that you could be hit with a bullet. That somebody who may be wishing harm could, I don't know a whole lot about these kinds of things, but could zap you with some kind of microwaves or something if they specifically targeted you. But I don't believe that you can have something on the 12th floor of some high-rise sending out waves that will specifically hurt particular victims in a whole large community. Could you do something energetically, using some kind of energy and affect a whole city, and everybody starts, getting the effect of it? Probably.
Mm-hmm.
Specifically target. I just don't understand how that can happen.
All right, well, fair enough. And, it may not be taking place right now, but someone has to speak to that. And I'm glad at least you pitched in to a certain degree because, as I said, this was spurred on by a listener saying, is this a plausible situation? I can only think that it might be in the future, but as you said when we last spoke, that this kind of connectivity is not really possible now. It may not be possible forever, but you're right. If the thought is in the person's mind, then that might be all you need to do what you want to do. You know what I mean?
That's right. And I do know people who were initially terrified that they were being somehow zapped by everyone in their neighborhood and everybody in every car and every employer and every person at the supermarket or whatever. Eventually did find out that, in fact, they had dissociated personalities who were working against the main part of the person to maintain their involvement in some kind of abusive cult that was hurting people and hurting them. And those parts of them were submissive to the leaders of that cult, and that they were running off in the middle of the night, and that's why they were waking up with sores and pain and, bleeding and all of these things.
Mm-hmm.
So I know that the bad guys on the cult side take advantage of that way of thinking. Do I have the scientific background to say what kinds of electromagnetic targeting are possible and which ones aren't? No. Do I have enough understanding of the brain to say that human thought cannot be read by a chip? I think I do.
All right. And I thank you for addressing that. Now, if we can move along to the agenda, and something that you always know piqued my interest when we were emailing and deciding way back when what we would talk about, and that I couldn't let go by without you addressing it, and how it relates to the work that you do, by all means. And that is, and this is what the Collins brothers, who were on just before you, were saying, that, as you stated, there is no one Illuminati or one world order. Every group wants to portray itself as the most illuminated and ultimately the world ruler. Okay, now, there are different groups out there who seek world government?
Yes, there are many, many, many different kinds of groups. Some have ethnic agendas. Some have spiritual agendas like Satanists and Luciferians and witches that practice abuse. I'm not talking about Wiccans, but I'm talking about, some people call it black witchcraft, or I call it abusive witchcraft. Those people want to run the world. For those witches, the male witches want to run the world and don't want anybody else, including the female witches, to have to be on Earth. The female witches want to own and run and live on the world with no one else, including no male witches. And how they reproduce is Fred Flintstone-like. I don't. It's absurd. There's the ethnic agendas, the Aryan agenda, and other ethnic agendas where only our race is worthy to live on this world, and everybody else shouldn't be here. There's those people, they want to own the world. There are moneyed groups who want to own the world. There are military groups who want to run the world. There are national groups. They all want the whole world for themselves. Sort of like the way history has been with, people taking over other people's land, for thousands of years.
Well, whereas I really didn't play, for lack of better words, devil's advocate with the Collinses. I more or less believe, like William Cooper did, and you need not know who he was.
Yeah, I know something about that.
Do you know Cooper?
I know I've read something about some document that got dug up out of some file cabinet or something. Is that it? Some kind of Illuminati agenda from 1,000,000 years ago?
Well, I tell you what, I'm not as familiar with Cooper as I probably should be, but he did do an extensive series, audio-wise, about the Mystery Babylon religions and how they went on. But what he said was, Doc, and that is, when you realize who's at the root of this, it is simple. And in a sense, I really do believe that. And yet, like when the Collinses were on just before you, the two brothers, they were saying, well, it isn't just as smooth and unified as you think it might be, using you in the rhetorical sense. But I will subscribe to the fact that I think it is pretty much a smooth situation. However, having said that, and because of what you emailed and what we spoke about a little bit, you're telling me also that there are competing groups and that not necessarily all things are great in their paradise.
Right, exactly. These groups weaken each other. Because they are infiltrating each other, they want to know what kind of mind control the other one uses. They want to find out the other one's plans, the other one's date when they plan to do things. By the way, a lot of their big dates all passed between 1998 and about 2004. They were all kinds, a lot of these groups had takeover dates planned. And because there was no kind of cataclysmic event that weakened a lot of the people as they anticipated, they didn't kick into action. And a lot of the prophecies for a lot of these groups about some things that they thought would happen either Earth-wise, moon, star, Earth, or people-wise, a lot of their predictions, it didn't happen, or, well, for Satanists, Satan was supposed to come and take over right before the millennium.
Okay.
And Satan didn't come and take over. So their little plan of takeover failed. And so a lot of these groups, their big secret date that they were going to take over the world has come and gone. And the personalities that had believed that they had better be loyal to the leaders in that group in order to be one of the few who got to survive, those personalities are starting to question the power and illumination or knowledge of the leaders of their group. A lot of these people are really in turmoil right now because they need help. They don't know where to go for help. And very often the host doesn't even know that there's this whole other set of personalities inside that are feeling this way. But meanwhile, they're suicidal and they're depressed and they're scared and they're having all kinds of symptoms that they can't explain.
I never press you on this, and it's not. It's not important that there's a right answer. But you have been in this work for so long. Spiritually, are you kind of convinced or not convinced that there is a Satan, perhaps, that of the biblical proportion that we all, well, some of us believe in? I go mostly by what
I have personally, when I work with survivors and the information that I synthesize from the very deep work, when I feel that I'm getting completely trustworthy information, I'm very skeptical, and I kind of scrutinize and question and keep all hypotheses running, and I do that for a long time before I formulate a conclusion. But where I personally am right now is that I do believe that there are evil entities. I don't believe I don't have any evidence that Satan per se is truly any more powerful than the others.
Okay.
Because I do believe that all of these things are relatively ineffective if you're not afraid. I believe that you do have control over them by your will, and that you can simply say, by your will and by your doing right, by your not doing evil, you can just say you're not allowed to be here, and they have to go. No matter how big and bad they may want to be, they actually have very little power. That's my opinion.
Okay, and you know, you were very good about looking at some photos that were sent to me that I sent to you, mm-hmm. and you and Stephen Ogilvy,
yes,
took a look at them. But what this began was a little discussion, and I thought it very interesting, and I just want to read it in the notes, because you made a dichotomy between some of the occult behavior that's going on, and I'm going to read this cold, but in the notes you said, usually the occult parents sell their kids to the espionage/criminal/ethnic/political groups to earn money and infiltrate the other group to learn their programming and other secrets, where I think there is something else, and I think we talked about it a little bit, where there might be a recruitment, perhaps Freemasons and such. Can you speak to that? I mean, because obviously this is not going to come as news to our listeners because of what we've heard from Kathleen Sullivan and Russ Dizdar. And it really is true that the real meat of the occultism is family bread, is it not?
Yes. I think these groups are involved in so many imprisonable acts, murdering babies and children and adults, child pornography, child prostitution. They cannot risk allowing a person in who has not been controlled through terror and dissociation their whole life. So what I mean by terror and dissociation is that if you severely hurt and terrify a baby, you will reliably create a dissociated part. A person's psyche cannot bear a certain amount of pain and terror. So when it crosses that line into the unbearable, the main part of the person will, let's say, hide within somehow. Some people say that's psychological. Some people say it's spiritual also. And another part will take over. That part has the job of withstanding pain and handling terror. And that is the part that is shaped to function within the underground criminal act, the underground criminal life of the cult. And then I would say as much effort as, or as much time and effort as is spent sexually abusing that child or worshiping whatever deities that group worships, an equal amount of time is spent on programming that part to never leak information to the host, to be terrified of ever telling or remembering or talking. Don't talk, don't tell. Remember to forget to remember. All these kinds of programming So what you end up with is a highly controlled person. That person you can risk being used for child prostitution, being used in ceremonies in which people are sacrificed. But you can't take a 15-year-old kid who's playing around with Dracula imagery and vampire ideas, etc., and really, truly get control of that person unless they have completely dissociated identities who can be manipulated.
Well, let me ask you about this. I mean, we speak about it, I don't want to say glibly, but the whole era of milk carton children, I can't believe they're all missing in the sense of that nobody really knows where they are and that they may be the victims of sex slavery or other things. What's your feelings on exactly what's happening with a lot of the missing children today?
Well, I think that the cults have gotten more careful. I think there are, I don't know the statistics, but I would guess that there are less truly missing children. I think, a lot of kids, of course, are taken in custody disputes.
Right.
But children that are taken for the purposes of abuse or murder, not that doesn't happen in custody disputes too.
No,
but
it's true, right?
But when it happens for purposes of for criminal purposes primarily, I think that the cults are instead. I think they have a few main sources for their sacrificial victims. One is infants or fetuses, so before their full term, of their own cult members. So these may be girls that are homeschooled or, where other people don't see that they're pregnant. They can force delivery and sacrifice that baby. I think that they pull children in a lot from Mexico.
Okay.
To bring them across the border and use them. And I know for a fact that sometimes homeless people are used. So if you have a completely indigent, wandering 50-year-old man who no one will know that he's missing or that he's dead because he's on this street one day and on that street another, and there, no one, that will be also the kind of victim that they take for their sacrifices.
How long have you been actively dealing with victims?
Well, it's a little over 10 years that I've been doing it with what I would say is some reasonable level of knowledge. Before that, I had some victims, and I did not understand the depths of this stuff, just how much really happens and how extensive the dissociation is. And looking back over my history of doing therapy, because I started in the mid-'70s as an art therapist, I didn't become a psychologist till 86.
Okay.
And so I look back at the people that I've worked with over 30 years and can see who now can understand, oh my God, that was a ritual abuse victim, and I didn't know it. I didn't know they were dissociative. That's why they were acting that way. That's why that boy was so terrified. That's why he was smearing feces all over the walls of the room. I look back and can diagnose what I couldn't diagnose then.
Well, then let me ask you, are you seeing an increase either because there are more populous subjects having been victimized, or is there, quote, better reporting? I mean, you never know what to believe. But from your standpoint, from what you've seen over the last 10 years or so, is there any kind of trend that you can identify?
Oh, over these 10 years? I guess there's somewhat of a slight trend toward people reaching out for help more. I guess the internet's probably been really, really helpful. I think that as much disinformation that has been spread to try to make people believe it's all false memories and therapists put these ideas in people's minds and none of it is real, there's so much good, credible information about the reality of this now that I know that helps people. And then very, very possibly the demise of a lot of these groups because their prophecies did not bear out at all is potentially causing a lot more people to seek help.
I want to tell folks you're listening to The Grassy Knoll. We have with us Dr. Ellen Lacter out of U California at San Diego, clinical psychologist that works with ritual abuse victims. She's been on before. We also want to say that we are coming to you from the courtesy of remnantradio.org out of Boulder City, Nevada, and we thank Paul Pilgrim for that. Doc, and also I want to say that...
I have to clarify something.
Oh, yeah, sure, go ahead. Do it.
I run a certificate program for the extension program at University of California, San Diego. I'm not actually on the faculty of the university itself. I run a program, a continuing ed program for therapists that are getting continuing education. But I'm not a university professor. Go ahead.
No, I understand why you have to specify. That's great, and thank you for doing that.
Yep.
But we applaud you for the work you do. Her website is Truth Be Known, and it's a really long URL. So what I would tell people to do is go to visigot.com. On the homepage under upcoming shows, Dr. Lacter's there. Her website's there. So click on that and see all that's there because it's really an extensive website. And so, yeah, Doc, I understand why you have to specify on that. But let me ask you this: it's a tough field you're in. What drives you on? I mean, I would say this to you: there can't be many victories. So respond to that. I hope I'm wrong.
It's hard won. It's a long road. It's incredibly exciting when it happens. You know, I'm in this the same way most therapists who are in this got there. You have a case. In my case, it was a child case where I was working with these children and trying to help them heal from what happened to them. And the magnitude of what happened, I started comprehending over time, and the amount that they went through, and my desire to do something for, to fight this. If you have a heart at all, you can't let it go. I don't believe it's right to let it go.
But, I mean, if I were in your shoes, okay, and you probably have more timber than I do, but, when you come home, can you just let it go?
No.
You know what you're dealing with. So let me just ask you. I mean, how much can you drop at the door when you leave every night?
I don't.
You can't really, can you?
No. It's very, very painful stuff when the person is able to really, get past the programming to never remember and never tell, and when you work a way out with them to be able to know what happened without triggering that program, and you find out the horror involved in what was done, the brutality and cruelty and the manipulation and the whole thing is really sickening. I used to have to not schedule anybody after I would work with a client with this kind of abuse. That would be the end of my day, and I'd have to go walk around for a while just to kind of walk it off and get okay again. And when I work with that kind of stuff, at the end of the day, I'm exhausted in a very different way than, normal, clients where it's not this depth of trauma.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just fine. I feel, energetic, good, alive and just not worn out. I feel just fine at the end of the work day. But this stuff is real painful. It makes you want to go to bed and cry, which is okay. I'm willing to do that.
Well, what kind of support do you get from, I guess, the psychology community at large? In other words, I'm going to guess that this probably is a little bit too messy for a lot of folks in academia. Maybe I'm wrong, but how is this looked at, and do you have any support as far as dealing with these individuals?
Most therapists in any given community who are doing this work hook up with each other. And I was in a group for a while where we met once a month with a bunch of therapists, and we would all, try to learn from each other about how would you handle this, how would you handle that. We get a lot of support from each other online. There are many physicians and many therapists who are involved in this underworld. So there are bad guys. I mean, and the abuser group raise their children to be positioned in the therapy community, to be positioned in law enforcement, to be positioned to child protective services, to be physicians and nurses and all of those things, so that they can suppress the evidence of this stuff, and so that they can suppress the truth. So, the media is another place where children are raised to take positions so that they can write all kinds of articles saying, this is all untrue, the therapist planted the memories, etc. So there's the disinformation group. There's, unfortunately, a lot of therapists who have gotten the only information that they have about ritual abuse from the disinformation campaign in the newspapers, which is very frustrating to me, because psychologists and therapists are not supposed to learn psychology from the newspaper. They're supposed to learn it from scholarly sources and, for instance, dissociation. I mean, the media made it look like that was a very, very rare disorder, and that it was created that the belief that it was there was created by therapists. And so a lot of therapists, just reading the newspaper, if somebody would come in and have symptoms that I would recognize immediately as a dissociative and as a person having dissociative personalities, like talking about oneself in the first person plural, we. We went to the grocery store, we drove here, we went here,
Right.
Those kinds of things that would make me go, oh, okay, time to ask questions to see what's going on with that. These people would, immediately say, oh, it just can't be. So, that's a problem. But okay, the good part is, I would say, the scholarly work on dissociation is the cutting edge of the trauma literature. It is there's incredible research going on. The fact that dissociation is such a huge part of the trauma reaction is lots of excellent research and theory and how to treat stuff is out there now. So that has become really good. Now, that community, many people in that community know that ritual abuse is real. Unfortunately, because of the whole propaganda campaign in the mid-90s, a lot of those people are afraid to publicly speak about the fact that they know ritual abuse is real, because there were so many lawsuits and there was so much discrediting of professionals in newspapers, etc. So I'm hoping that now that we know how to protect ourselves legally much better than we did in the mid-90s, that people will again step forward like I have to publicly say, I know this is real.
I want to give people a last chance, in fact, because we have just about 14 minutes left, that if they want to table any kind of question or comment, to do so now at visigoth@hotmail.com. That's VYZYGOTH. or you can instant message at AOL WDCF 1350, or you can call in on 352-567-1009. Now, having said that, Doc, we've kind of like skirted the issue. Not that you have, but I have. But can you give us a cross section? And I don't mean to be tawdry, but I mean give people an idea what's going on out there about the kind of damage that human beings have incurred. Can you do that? I mean, are we talking about sexual abuse? What is a gamut of what you have to deal with?
We're talking about torture. Torture from infancy, and very often, unfortunately, all the way through adulthood. So, the 35 or 45-year-old client that may come in for therapy with dissociated personalities and start to realize about the sexual abuse, perhaps, that went on in their family, and eventually starts realizing that there was a ritualistic element to it, which basically means that their abusers were involved in some kind of spiritual agenda that involved hurting people and sacrifice and all of that. Very often those people find out in the course of therapy that they're still being abused, that personalities within them are still involving them in this abuse, because the programming was done so effectively that these personalities are sort of maybe in a robot-like sense, still obeying, or maybe the cult succeeded in what they truly wanted to create, which is a personality who buys in to the whole thing. Now, underneath the buying in is usually tremendous terror and years of programming to make sure they never defied. Huge punishment, electroshock, being hung, chemicals that create horrible burning sensations on the skin, drugs that create horrible states, drowning, suffocation, and resuscitation right before death. Just horrible forms of torture every time the person does not completely comply. So, for instance, a simple example would be if a child says something leaking a little tiny something to a teacher or to a neighbor or whatever, there would be huge punishment for that within a ritual.
When you talk about almost someone brought to the brink of death and resuscitated, right. This happens time and time again to this individual. This isn't just like a one-time experience, right?
That's right. It's just gruesome.
I mean, how can they... And how old might these people be? Are they children necessarily?
Yes. It's to put in the level of programming to create these really walled-off parts. I believe that's got to be done very, very early. You couldn't start, I don't think you could start at age 4. Maybe. Probably not age 5. Probably not age 4.
So in other words, these individuals, these almost infants, have to be brought up thinking this is like almost like normal?
The dissociated part perceive that as life, yes.
Yeah, because if that's your reality, well, what else, is there?
And that's the horror of the whole thing. Everybody that personality is around believes in, this enormous power of Satan or whatever. And so how is a child supposed to question that? How is that part supposed to question that? Plus, they're terrorized into believing it, and every time they don't do exactly what they are told to do, which often includes hurting other people and very often includes hurting people who they care about, then they're punished even worse. So it's like, stab, one of my clients told me that she reached the point where she knew that the new pet that they gave her was a pet she'd have to kill. So they set you up to love something
and
then
right.
kill it. Yeah, it's just so evil. That's the kind of stuff that messes me up. Is when I hear those kinds of things, particularly when I hear a new one. So in other words, if I know of that kind of some kind of evil already, I'm better off than when I hear about a whole new horrible thing and I just like devastated. How did they think of that? Who could think of something like that? What drives that? You know, it's just sickening. It's just you want to reject the reality. You do. I guess I experience what the people who don't want to believe this experience in a way, because it's like it's just so horrible. You just want to not believe it, but then again, when somebody is explaining it and they're re-experiencing the difficulty breathing and having the pain in the part of the body where their arm was held down and the emotion is real and the whole thing fits together, and it's the same kind of ritual you heard about from another client a year before, you know it's real.
When you were going through your academic experience from your master's through your PhD, at the time you were doing that, did you have any inkling of what was really happening out there?
No, not at all. I would have never. We didn't. When I went, we didn't even learn about dissociation. When I went to graduate school, I finished my PhD in '84. We didn't even learn. I mean, there might have been an elective class that I didn't take that happened to touch on it, but that wasn't part of the curriculum. You know, I would say most graduate programs have a course in family violence now, child abuse and domestic violence. That's pretty standard.
Yeah.
And do most of them have a class in trauma per se? I don't know. And if they did, I think that should be required. I believe that. I would say I believe more than half of all psychological problems are trauma-based.
But I mean, what an avowal if any academic institution would turn around and say, okay, we have courses for occult ritual abuse. That isn't really happening, is it?
It's not happening within the grad schools. It's happening a little bit on the continuing education level for therapists, but even there, it's sort of disguised. So, for instance, we have a lot of good continuing education available on dissociative disorders and dissociative identity disorder and how to treat it, and dissociation in general. We have a lot of good continuing education. I have, for instance, there's one person who teaches that a lot, and I have gone to classes by that person where that person did not talk about ritual abuse at all because there were maybe 50 people in the room, and I think that person was afraid there could be negative repercussions. But when there was a group of only 20 people in the room, and some of the people in the audience brought it up, and nobody seemed to have a really negative reaction,
right,
and the speaker was willing to go into that. So everybody's still being very careful. But I don't think we need to be as careful as, I think people do not need to be as careful as they're being. I think that, you know about the lawsuits in the mid-'90s?
No.
Okay. What happened was a lot of therapists were sued by their patients for implanting false memories.
Oh, regressive, yeah, okay, right.
But a lot of that was set up. So, for instance, I know of a story where one patient was in an inpatient unit in a hospital and was working on their ritual abuse trauma in the hospital, and when that person went home from the hospital, there was an inch-thick packet in their mail from a high-profile organization that I'm not going to name that was touting that this is all implanted memories by therapists, an inch-thick packet on how to sue your therapist for implanting memories.
Okay.
So you got a person who's, been abused their whole life, and they're destitute and, barely getting through the day and still, going through a lot of trauma, and somebody shows them a way to earn $1 million, and maybe they're also still being abused by their cult, and maybe the cult is still telling them to sue the therapist. So there were a lot of lawsuits, but they got therapists mostly for maybe incomplete record keeping, so, maybe the chart note didn't always include some kind of reassessment of the functioning, or, it's just the dot the I, cross the T type of stuff that a lot of people got nailed on. But it started with the false memory thing. And there were some where there were some successful false memory lawsuits. But we've learned as a profession to be a lot more careful now. So we, for instance, we give informed consents to our clients that explain that memory can be influenced by this, and that it's not our job as a therapist to say this memory is true, that memory is true. Our job is to help the person heal from the trauma they experience and from their subjective experience of whatever happened, but that we're not saying that these things are true or false. So we've learned all kinds of ways to not be trapped by this false memory stuff anymore.
Is there an age group that is more involved in this? Are young kids probably most susceptible, or are you dealing with people who are older? How does that go? Or maybe that they start at an early age and only look for help later on. What do you see with regarding to that demographic?
Exactly the last thing that you said. The abuse always starts very early, so they can have completely dissociated personalities, and while those children are being raised, which is usually by their cult families, they do not leak at all because they have no independence. They're completely dependent on their abusers. Sometimes it's just one parent, but still, that's quite a lot of dependence. And it seems that the dissociative barriers for women tend to start breaking down in their 30s, and for men a little later. But
you with us, Doc?
yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean we've got to wrap it up. We got about 50 seconds left.
Okay. Well, I have to say, but there is a trend going on where younger people are remembering now.
Okay.
I don't know if that's because we have the good media, the good presence on the internet.
All right, Doc, listen, thanks very much for being with us. An hour does fly by. We thank you for revisiting the grassy knoll and, spending the time you have to on a very unpleasant subject. But we thank you so much that you're on the front lines for doing that. Thanks for coming back again. And I'm sure we're going to talk again. God bless you and good night.
You too. Thank you.
Bye-bye.